VP, my goodness, Family and Community Initiatives. We are so thankful to have you joining us this evening. I know everyone has been anxious, like what is going on here at One City? What's going on in this world right now? A little bit about me. I've been at One City for 3 years now. So while you're waiting, please make sure you unmute. Right now, I am at the Edgewater Hotel, but we are going to get started. Please make sure you put yourself on mute.
Marilyn, you can mute everybody too.
And I'm trying to figure out how you mute everyone.
I just want to see what he has to say.
We still got people joining in. I want to say everybody can mute. Thank you. Everyone's been muted. Okay. Thank you, Faren, for that. We're at 50 participants here. Again, if you go over to the chat, please click on the link and let us know how you're feeling right now, because we will do this again after the presentation. And we're hoping that after the presentation, you feel more informed on there, okay? Without further ado, I want to get us started. We have our principal, Faren D'Abell, who just became principal oh my goodness, I don't know how long it hasn't been that long at all. And then we also have as our medical director, Dr. Dipesh. Do you want to go to the next screen? Okay. Our meeting norms, we will try our best to adhere to our agenda so we can respect everyone's time. Please make sure to turn off the volume, put yourself on mute, turn your cameras off if you can too, so we can concentrate totally on the presentation. Questions can be posted in the chat box, as I was mentioning about the link above, and myself and Ms. Kim Ryan will be monitoring and we'll look at the questions that's being asked during the initial presentation. We'll try to group the similar questions. If we run out of time to answer, we will answer them in a recap and send each of you the copy of this presentation, which is being recorded right now, so you can see it then. So this is good. And then during the Q&A portions, please use, if you haven't used Zoom before, there's a little feature that says raise your hand. That way I can tell who's want to ask them the questions, okay? And then at that time, you can unmute yourself. Next slide.
So this is actually how you will raise your hand, because it's not particularly intuitive. So on your taskbar, which it depends on what what device you're on, if it's on a phone or a computer, Mac or PC, but there should be a taskbar that has your name, has your unmute here, start video, all these things. So you're going to want to click on this participants piece. Once you click on participants, this box shows up, and on this box you're going to click on more, and then these options show up here, and you would you can click on you can actually click on the clap or the thumbs up if you need to ask a question. So this is our agenda for this evening. We'll do a quick introduction of myself. We'll give you a summary of the planning we've been doing for the last 4 weeks, and we'll be doing for another week. We'll be talking about the options that we'll have for educating our scholars during COVID. Talk about some reopening precautions. We will introduce Dr. Navsaria, who is our medical director. He'll give an introduction of himself. He'll also give some commentary on life in the time of the pandemic. And then we will talk about return to school precautions. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer with Dr. Navsaria, with me, Nurse Felker, and Nurse Assistant Perea, if she is in here. And that's pretty much it. So that's what we're going to do. We've got about 50 minutes left to do it. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So I'm Faren D'Abell. Coming most recently from Chicago, I have been an urban education leader for many years. I've been leading a school in Chicago, Detroit, Indianapolis. My school in Chicago is Fraser International Magnet School. It was a non-selective school of choice in Chicago, and we were the first non-selective school in Chicago to win the National Blue Ribbon Schools Award. We're also the first school in Chicago to become a 90-90-90 school, which is 90% students of color, 90% who received free and reduced lunch, and 90% who met or exceeded state standards. Personally, I have one son, a granddaughter, and I enjoy mentoring youth. I've been mentoring young men for about 17 years now, and my oldest is 27. He's a Morehouse graduate, got other young men from Tuskegee and other universities. So just talk a little bit about what we've been planning over the summer. And this is a little different. For those of you who have been at One City for a while, we haven't had a lot of time to do planning like this. So this is something that is making us ultra prepared for this upcoming fall. Obviously, it's a very different time in the fall, this coming fall, but we feel very confident that we're prepared. So the different areas we've been looking at for preparation have been curriculum and assessment, school health, RTI and student support, our Scholars Academy, professional development, school design and operations, business and facilities, food operations, school safety and security, family engagement, communications, partnerships, talent management or human resources, technology, volunteers, and budget and future planning. And one thing that we did with all of this, because we don't know what's going to happen in September based on the levels of the virus, we planned for 3 different eventualities. So those 3 things were all in-person instruction, all virtual instruction, or a hybrid of the 2, which could be a couple days on, a couple days off, could be half day morning, half day afternoon, various different options. So we've planned for all 3 of these different eventualities. All right. So the options for the fall opening, we've spent hundreds of hours studying various plans, meeting with public health officials, mental health experts. As I just said, it's ever changing. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen in the fall, but we've created those plans to address the different options that might happen. So we did a survey with families, with all of you here, and we wanted to determine the preferences that you have for a fall reopening. And so families ranked, we had these different options. So in-person learning full-time, Monday through Friday, making sure that we adhere to safety protocols and social distancing, and possibly using additional space outside of the One City campus. The other option was remote learning with virtual live lessons Monday through Friday. Other option was in person, but only 2 full days a week, and then virtual instruction for the other days. And option 4 was in person morning for one cohort, and then switch to another cohort in the afternoon. And all of this obviously is for the purpose of having fewer students in the class so that we can appropriately social distance. And then 2 options, I'm not sure, or I have no preference. I'll be able to make these decisions. Or I don't have any preference. I'll be able to make any of these situations work. And there was another option. The last one was we won't be returning, but actually that received 0 votes. So that's not listed here, but it's listed next. All right. So 90% response rate. So very good response rate. Way more than most parents completed the survey. So the first choice option, very first choice, the largest was this piece of in-person full-time learning Monday through Friday. So about 44% of our families said that they wanted to be here in person all day. And the second largest was, the second largest was this all day remote with live learning. So that was the 22%. So that makes up almost 80% of the families either want to do all in person or remote learning with live lessons. And we'll break it down by grade level. So this was the grade level breakdown. So you can see that this all in person piece here, that was number 1 for 4K, 5K, and first. And for second grade, number 1 was the live remote learning. So a little difference there in grade level results. And then you can see the piece I was just talking about. Nobody indicated that their child would not be attending. Sorry, excuse me. Okay. So the top 2 choices were all in person instruction every day or all remote instruction every day. Here's an example of what that might look like. And again, these are just samples. One other thing that we're going to be doing, we'll get results back by the weekend, is a survey of staff. And that will certainly make an impact on what our final plans are. But the plans that we've been working on over these last 4 weeks, this was sort of a sample result of what that might look like. So this is if we had all in-person instruction. So we would start with breakfast, then we would move to journals and handwriting. And this is actually, this is a kindergarten example. And then crew, if you're not familiar with crew, that is like a morning meeting. This is the time when we talk about things that we want to accomplish. We look at our goals. We can talk about people who might have harmed us. We can talk about how we're going to fix those things. Crew is the social emotional piece and educating based on our habits of character. And then we'd have math or an expeditionary learning module, which is ELA, language arts, or math. We have a brain break as needed. The skills block is part of this expeditionary learning model. So this is where we are talking about the actual skills, so the phonics skills. And so that would start here. The whole group section would start here. And then we'd have some time outside, lunchtime. When is something new that we have instituted for this coming year. WIN stands for what I need. And so this is a time that's common across all grades. So in this is 5K through second grade. Basically, we're going to look at what each individual student needs, and we're going to be able to move them to the class that, for this short period of time, to the class that meets that specific need. This is an all hands on deck piece. So there would likely also be folks like myself and Ms. Traxler, Ms. Ryan, people that are not normally full-time in the classroom. We would all be supporting during this time to make sure that we are able to meet individual students where they are. So if there are students who need a greater challenge, then they might be in one room working on more challenging math problems. If there's a student who, or students who need more support in phonics, then they might be in another room working with a teacher on phonics. So that happens for about 30 minutes a day. And then the other module, so here if we did English language arts in the morning, then we would do math in the afternoon. We've been in consultation actually with Dr. Seth Pollack from the University of Wisconsin. He's a child psychologist, and many of these things came as recommendations that he gave us. So this actually was, excuse me, a piece that he was suggesting because different children have different sleep schedules, they have different nutrition, and so there's no perfect time, he says, to have a math or reading time. But there are times for each student that are going to be better times for learning. So he suggested that we actually rotate this. So on certain days, we may have math in the morning, and on other days, we might have math in the afternoon. So no student, based on their personal circumstance, will have a sort of down day every day. Then we move into academies. Academies are arts and physical education, those kind of integrations. And then the skills block, this skills block is the part that is diverse for diverse learners who are looking at different levels. So this whole group piece over here, this is where everybody learns the same thing at one time, sort of an introduction. When we get to the skills block over here, students are broken into separate groups, and they're working again on the areas that they need most work in. Labs is something we didn't get to at all this last year. This is the part that typically is a little more engaging for students. So this is the hands-on piece. They're discovering, it's guided inquiry, so they're not being directed every minute of that time. They're being observed, they're being supported, and it's more student-led. And then at the end of the day, we do closing crew, which is basically a wrap-up of the initial crew. So again, we can talk about how did your day go, what kind of challenges did you have, what kind of goals, did you meet your goals, do you have new goals, that kind of thing, and then dismissal. In a virtual situation, it's similar, and one of the things that we strive to do with this virtual planning is make a schedule that is very similar to what our in-person schedule would be. Another thing that Dr. Pollack suggested was making sure that we have consistency. So we want to not have to have students move from one schedule while they're doing virtual learning, and then when they come back in person, it's a completely different schedule. So we wanted to try and keep that somewhat consistent so that they have that consistency when we do end up coming back into full all-in-person education. So again, very similar. One thing I want to point out here is the color codes here are a little different. So these green ones, these are things that will be live. So if we had students who are, let's say there were a number of students who were in class, physically in class, in person with the teacher there. What we're anticipating right now is that that lesson would be broadcast live. And so you would be able to watch that through Zoom, that live presentation of the lesson. So the crew would be something we want everybody to participate in because it's the team building aspect of the class. And then The skills block whole group, again, that's a thing that's the same for everybody. The introduction to the language arts block that day. Math, again, would be the same for everyone, so that would be live. And then closing crew would be live. The pieces that would not be live, and this actually changed a little bit based on the responses during the survey. So we're definitely grateful that you gave us these responses, because it did change our plans. So the EL module, the academies, and skills block, these would be things that are recorded. And one of the things that was mentioned several times in the survey results was that parents wanted to make sure that we didn't have too much screen time. So if you're at home and facilitating this, or if you've got someone at home facilitating this for the virtual learners, this would be recorded. So you don't have to be participating in this from 9:30 to 10:30. You could participate in this anytime during the day. If when you come home from work at 5 o'clock, that's a better time to do it. You can do that. So these orange pieces, you do at your leisure. The purple pieces, these are the pieces that we're going to give you a learning target, which is what we're expecting the child to learn during that time. If they're in class, we would be supporting that learning target. We'll also give you the materials that you would need, sort of a short parent lesson plan on what we're expecting to happen here. And one of the tenets of the EL education learning program is that there's freedom in how we learn things. So if we gave you, for example, a learning target of, I can write the letters A, B, and C, we're going to give you guidance on how we would teach that. But if you've got a better way and your child can learn that way, that's great. Go with that. So these purple areas are areas where we're giving you guidance, but you don't have to follow that. If you've got a better way, we'll give you the learning target. If you have a better way to meet that learning target, go for it. And these obviously also are at your leisure. So the only times it would be live streaming are this crew, the whole group skills block, the whole group math, and the closing crew. They'll also be recorded. So if it doesn't meet your schedule and you can't be there live, we'd love it if you could, because then you can ask questions. But if you can't, then these are recorded and you can watch those later in the day as well. So trying to make it something that is workable for all families. So again, this is what it would look like both for students who are physically in the building and students who would be all virtual. And again, we've spent over a month full-time creating this these well thought out plans, trying to hit all the various possibilities, but we really don't know what's going to happen. We're planning for this now more than a month before school would start, and things are changing every day. So apparently there are new CDC guidelines coming out today. So when we see those, that may change some of our plans. So we are hoping to be able to accommodate the parents who want to have children in the school. And we certainly want to make sure that we can get the students who are most academically vulnerable or social emotionally vulnerable into the school, because that's obviously going to be the best way to educate. If we are allowed, MMSD is not having in-person class for anyone. If we are allowed, we will do it. And is Dr. Navsaria here yet?
Yes, yes,
All
he
right,
is.
cool. So I'm going to just introduce him real quick. So he is a doctor, a pediatrician, working in public interest. He blends the roles of physician, occasional children's librarian. He also has a MS in library sciences, educator, public health professional, and child health advocate with graduate degrees in public health, children's librarianship, physician assistant studies, and medicine. He brings a unique combination of interests and experience together. As an associate professor of pediatrics at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health, he has practiced primary care pediatrics in a variety of settings with special interest in underserved populations like ours. So he is our medical director, and welcome, Dr. Navsaria. Oh, I'm sorry, we muted him. All right.
Thank you very much.
There you go, thanks, sorry.
I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to speak here this evening. I am really, there's been a lot going on about COVID-19 and the pandemic, and there's a lot of confusion out there, a lot of worry, a lot of fear. Media doesn't help. Sometimes media is very well written and the information is factual and very well presented, and sometimes it goes off into really crazy places. And I do not blame parents, teachers, staff, administration, policymakers for feeling a little bewildered and confused by all of this. Infectious diseases like this are well known to pediatricians. In fact, pediatrics was largely a field of thinking about infectious diseases for decades. It still is. We still deal with a lot of fevers and ear infections and pneumonias and all those sorts of things, although it's largely dropped out thanks to immunization. Immunizations have actually really changed the nature of what we do in pediatrics in so many ways. The first thing I'd like to say is everyone, staff, administration, parents, kids, everyone alike, the most important thing is to be flexible. And I think you heard that in the presentation just now. It may feel at times that we don't know anything about this virus. And I had to tell you, that's absolutely untrue. We actually know quite a bit. There's a lot known about viruses like this. Regular coronaviruses have been around for decades. All of us have gotten a cold from a regular coronavirus sometime in our life, probably multiple times. So we actually know a lot about respiratory viruses, and we know a lot about coronaviruses. This one in particular, though, is different in that it does change up some things. It causes many more problems, especially for at-risk adults, and that can cause all sorts of issues. What we are learning is changing dramatically. I mean, it's a little funny to think that we're here in the middle of July, and this all started just in the middle of March, and how much we've learned in our own country here has been quite dramatically different. And we've managed to refine some of our ways of thinking about how to protect ourselves and how to protect our loved ones, what we do need to test for or look for, and what we don't. There's still some big questions out there. And a lot of these things may not be answered for a while, or they may be answered fairly soon. There's a lot of work going on looking at all of this. So sometimes it can feel like, wait a minute, they were telling us last week that we were supposed to do this, and now this week we're supposed to do this. I'm confused. Do they even know what's going on? The nature of science is that as we learn more, we change up things. We do things differently. Just before I logged on, I was actually fielding a question from a friend who said, wait a minute, I thought that COVID testing was that long swab that goes into your nose and tickles your brain. Why, when my colleague went to the Alliance Center and got tested this week, it was just a swab in the nose and not all the way back? Well, that's because actually the testing procedures in some places have changed depending on the machines they're using, the procedures, the reagents, all that stuff, because they've shown that actually in those situations, they're getting reasonably equivalent results, right? So that's science advancing. Now, if somebody really wants the brain tickling swab, I'm sure we can arrange that. But most people would turn us down on that and would be happy to just get something that goes in a couple of centimeters and so on. So all these things are being analyzed, they're being looked at, they're being tested, they're being checked, and we're learning more and more about how this virus is spread as we gain more information that's out there. So please be flexible. When you hear a change, it's not that people guessed or made up things or don't know what's going on. It's because things are evolving, and it's evolving in a better direction. Number two, we need to remember, I think sometimes it's very easy to get scared about what we're hearing. There's some big picture things. One, the data globally is clear that children themselves are far less affected by the infection of this virus. And that's actually a blessing. I mean, I'm so happy that my colleagues in the ICUs in the Children's Hospital are seeing virtually no cases. Okay, that's a great thing. This is completely different, by the way, from most respiratory viruses that tend to hit kids much worse. Okay, now this is not to say that there aren't some cases out there of kids who have been deeply affected. We've all seen a newspaper headline somewhere. But let's also remember that that is tiny numbers, you know, a few dozen globally versus the untold thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of adults who have been affected and sometimes have gotten quite sick and quite ill. So we need to remember that as well. For many people, this virus will be a bad cold. For many people, they might not even have symptoms, right? This is one of the things that concerns us, is that this asymptomatic spread that you may not even know. I could be infected right now and I wouldn't know it, right? And I'd have no reasonable way of knowing it. And it's not practical to go testing everyone every day for a whole variety of reasons. So we need to recognize that if someone is positive, that's not an automatic, oh my goodness, they're going to die, they're going to come to harm. Most will actually get better, particularly the younger they are. So when we think about how we keep children safe anywhere, at home, in school, in any other public setting, really what we need is we need layers of things. The first and most important thing is thinking about how we keep children from being unnecessarily in settings that they don't absolutely need to be in. Okay, so that was why the question was asked, would you be keeping your kid at home? Do you want to do virtual schooling, etc.? We also need to recognize, though, that kids need to socialize, kids need in-person learning, and they need to be able to have the ability to have other adults around them that they know and love and can support them, right? All those things are good things. And we are always trying to balance those things. And this is why some of the statements have said it's not just about preventing infection, it's about thinking about the child as a whole and their well-being. And that's really what I hope you heard in what the presentation was so far. Number two, let's not ask kids to do impossible things. I was doing a presentation to libraries, and I got asked a question: how can we socially distance toddlers in a storytime group in a limited area of space? And my answer was simply, you don't, right? Toddlers are going to touch each other, and at a public library is different, right? You have kids coming from all sorts of different places and so on. That might just not be possible to do. So don't set up impossible situations. Don't start setting up rules like all kids at age 3 will start staying 6 feet apart at all times. That's not feasible. That's ridiculous. I'm a camp doctor every year at a summer camp. Okay, so we're talking older kids. We didn't open this year because we were just wondering how in the world we were even going to be able to prevent 14-year-olds jumping off the bus and running up to their friends and hugging them. Right? That's crazy. It's going to drive the adults nuts. It's going to drive the kids nuts. It wouldn't have been the same experience. And luckily we had the option in that camp to say, we're not going to open. And then finally, what can we do within those settings where they do need to be next to each other? This is where we talk about hand hygiene, where we talk about masking in older kids and things like that to reduce spread, good ventilation in the rooms when possible. Right now, yes, it's possible to open windows and things like that. That might be a little more challenging in Wisconsin in January. So climate will not be our friend there. So I think there's a lot of different layers of things. So that way, if somebody slips up a little bit, right? Their mask's askew, they forget and take off their mask or whatever, that's not the only thing that's preventing spread from going on. If your child is ill, they will be asked to be evaluated just to make sure that we're not unknowingly spreading it throughout. And there's processes and procedures being delineated for that. And if they don't have, if they're negative, wonderful, great, then we know that and can move on. So we're really thinking about these things in a multi-layered approach, some of which will be very visible to parents and some of which are less visible. But I'm sure that the staff will be happy to talk about it if you ask, at any point. So we've thought about this a lot in early childhood, in K through 12, and in many other settings. There's going to continue to be adjustments. There's going to continue to be ways we tweak this. And the other thing that none of us on this call can control, and trust me, I so wish I could control it, is what's going on in the outside world, right? If community spread is lower and is really low, then our children will be safer because there's less of a chance of someone being infected and bringing that into our community here. If community spread is sky high because our people are all out, they're not wearing masks, they're trying to go about as if nothing's going on, they're touching each other, they're breathing on each other, they're singing together, whatever. Well, that's gonna maintain this. So as adults, as people in the community, talking to your relatives, to your friends, anyone around you, we need to impress on everyone the importance of doing all these things that public health is asking us to do, because that is ultimately what will keep everyone safe, first and foremost. So that's my high level view of kind of just really thinking about all this. Again, a lot of work's gone into it. A lot of work will continue to go on into it. And I think is there time for questions now, or?
Mm-hmm.
I think you're muted there.
Thank you. We were going to go over kind of what our precautions are going to be, and then if you're able to stick around to do questions and answers after that.
Great. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So this is actually one of the things that we're going to be doing for an education standpoint. We have, this video is already created by Nurse Belker. We're going to be creating other videos on other pieces like the hand washing. This was particularly for how not to touch your face. Let's take a listen. I don't think I'm sharing sound though. Let me get back to that. There we go.
Want to touch your eyes, touch your thighs instead. If you want to touch
Too much bandwidth.
your nose, touch your toes instead. If you want to touch your lips, touch your hips instead. Keep your hands away from your face. Woo!
All right. And Nurse Belker, if you would like to share what the CDC symptoms are at the moment. Make sure.
Sure.
Good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this list is from the CDC. I got it a couple days ago, and it's always changing, or it's often changing, I should say. And new symptoms can be added as we get more information. But the ones you've probably heard the most about are a cough, a shortness of breath, chills, muscle pain, sore throat, a new loss of taste or smell, some gastrointestinal systems, nausea, vomiting, or diarrhea, and congestion or runny nose. And these are very vexing symptoms because, of course, they don't always, and fever should be on there. Perhaps I omitted that, but a fever over 100.4 is also common with COVID. But so many of these symptoms don't really indicate COVID. However, since all of them are associated with COVID infection, we ask that if your child has any of these symptoms, and we'll try to keep posting these symptoms in the school and on a decided place online. And if any of these symptoms are true of your child, then the child should stay home. If you're really convinced that really this has nothing to do with COVID, then in order to bring your child to school with any of these symptoms, provided he has had no fever for at least 1 day and possibly 3 days, depending on the guidelines we have at the time, then we ask that you take the child to the doctor and get a note that really these symptoms that he's showing do not have to do with COVID. So if you bring a doctor's note, that will be sufficient.
Great, thank you. So this is our draft of the reopening precautions and protocols. This is again for in-person teaching. And I just wanted to address some of the questions that came up in the chat. First of all, yes, the PowerPoint will be available after the session, and it also, obviously, the video will be available, so you'll be able to see it in that as well. We also, the schedules, the sample schedule that was listed, that particularly was for 5K. Most of the things that we're talking about here are actually specific to 5K to second grade. So there are some slightly different guidelines for 4K, and they're a little more stringent. So like class sizes are going to be a little smaller for 4K, and then things like the start and end times will be, because they're still aligned with the curriculum for a preschool, and so they'll be aligned more to the preschool standards than the elementary standards. And then we are also looking at trying to facilitate play dates. As Dr. Navsaria said, that social emotional interaction is important. And so we are going to create a plan that we can facilitate families who have similar social distancing standards to be able to schedule regular play dates. Dr. Pollack also suggested that it would make sense to stay with that same group. So if you've got 3 or 4 friends that you've aligned with who have similar values as far as social distancing, make those play dates the same with that same crew of friends. And finally, Dr. Navsaria talked about the climate issues for opening windows when we get to January. If we're still not able to have full classes or have any classes, or rather if we're able to be in the school in any way by January, we have been actively working on new facility options. And we have a couple very promising ones, and we anticipate that those will be ready by January. So hopefully the weather will not become an issue. So our initial draft of what our precautions would look like for in-person teaching, our arrivals and departures. And again, this is 5K through 2nd. Start times would likely be slightly staggered by class. So that would likely be between 7:30 and 9 o'clock for a start, and between 4 and 5:30 for an end. And that would allow for appropriate social distancing. You can imagine if we had 150 scholars trying to come at the same time, we wouldn't be able to social distance them. We wouldn't be able to get you out in a timely manner to be able to check temperatures, all those things. So we would likely stagger in probably 10-minute increments the start times for each class. We'd have entry and exit points would be limited. Almost all of our classrooms at 2012 have an exterior door. There's only one classroom that does not, so we would have an alternate path for that classroom. But the classes that have an exterior door, we would use those exterior doors for entry and exit. Families are expected to complete our daily health questionnaire. You can do it on your phone, you can do it on a computer. It's a Google form. And if you're not able to do that, then you can fill out a paper questionnaire when you get here. But obviously, if it's done before that, the process of checking your child in would be much quicker. And at the end of the day, you would arrive at the designated pickup time, which again would be staggered. You'd wait outside, being socially distanced yourself, and then classrooms will be released to the families at that same staggered time frame. And just one caveat, unscheduled pickups will be very challenging. So we only allow those during emergencies. And if there are excessive early pickups for emergencies, then we would consider moving that scholar out of the virtual or out of the in-person learning to solely virtual. And then again, no, this is the same as we have right now. No parent or guardian is allowed inside the building without prior authorization. So we're really trying to keep all the classrooms, all the common space just very clean. And so we don't want to have folks moving from place to place. And a designated staff member would be present to lock and unlock the gates and monitor those waiting at the designated entry points. Health screening procedures. Nurse Felker, would you like to talk about that again?
Sure. I myself am in the high risk category due to my age. So the member of the nursing staff who would be present is Isabel Perea, our nursing assistant, who has been doing this for the childcare portion starting a few weeks ago. She will be at the health check station welcoming families and wearing personal protective equipment. She'll take temperatures, and if the temperature is over 100.4 is the guideline that you see in most places, CDC and public health. So if it is 100.4 or higher, as determined by the infrared thermometer, then we will double check it using the health office digital thermometer. And if the second reading confirms fever, then parents will be asked to make alternative arrangements until the fever has subsided. Some guidelines up until now have said the child needs to be fever-free for 3 days, and I believe that still is the guideline, but some guidelines related to fever have recently changed. So that may be the case, that that's kind of something that is changing. But it looks like children with fever can participate in virtual lessons at home. And then, but most children won't have fevers, and they'll receive a sticker to indicate they are cleared for the day. And then parents or guardians can walk their scholar to the designated door for their classroom. And then scholars will stand on the demarcation points for social distancing. And so families will receive drop-off times And the gates will be locked after 9 a.m. And if parents bring their children after 9 a.m., they'll require a call to the office then to gain entrance.
Thank you. All right, so a couple of things that we're looking at from classroom and building modifications that we're examining at this moment. As I just mentioned, we might have additional space outside of one city. Some of that may be immediate and some of that may be in January. We're going to limit the furniture that is in the classroom so we can maximize the floor space so we can have appropriate social distancing. The child to educator ratios will be 9 to 15 to 1. So a class size on the low end of 9 and on the high end of 15. And that will be determined again by the specific space for each classroom. Every classroom is not the same size. So that will limit that. And for, we're going to be looking, as I think I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be looking at the students who are most academically vulnerable to not being in school. And then also the students who are social emotionally could be damaged by not being in school. And then finally, parents who have no other option for childcare or a way to support their child if they're not in school. We'll have a regular sanitizing and disinfectant schedule that's actually already been created, and that's going to be a combination of both the classroom staff and the custodial staff. Classrooms will not intermix. The academies will be virtual. So again, we're trying to avoid any time that students are exposed to too many adults that would be seeing multiple classes. So in academies, that one teacher would end up seeing 7 different classes, and we don't want to make that a daily habit where there's an adult that has to interact with every class, because then if that adult happened to have COVID at some point, then that automatically shuts down the entire school. Only one classroom at a time will be allowed in the same outdoor space. Sharing items will be limited, and no close proximity field excursions or gatherings would occur until further notice. We may have walking trips or outdoor education when possible. Meals are another thing that are going to be very different. We have typically had the family style meal preparation, and so that's going to change. Obviously the food safety protocols we followed, but the family style would turn into meals that are served individually wrapped on plates. So they'll be sealed. There are no students touching each other's plates. Everything is individualized. Chef and Linda would leave the food cart outside the door for the educator to retrieve it. So again, that's another area where we're trying to limit the number of adults who see multiple students. We don't want to have that happen if we don't have to. And then children would be seated with appropriate social distancing. Supplies that the families who are bringing students for in-person teaching would provide: a filled water bottle with the child's name on it, preferably disposable. So our water fountains are closed. Obviously that would be a huge area that many students would be touching, so we're not allowing that. So we suggest that you send a water bottle with your child each day so that they have additional water to drink. An appropriately fitted mask that they're accustomed to wearing, so something that isn't annoying them, something that they would wear at home. And then school supply items that may be listed on the school supply list. And really, these are things that we just want to make sure we're not sharing. So pencils, scissors, the kind of things that students in a normal environment would want to share. And we want to make sure that you practice safer home habits as well. We're going to make sure that we do that here. We're going to obviously encourage all of our staff and all the adults that are in the building to do that as well. Just a little personal background on myself. Some of you already know this, but I'm actually a kidney transplant recipient recently, within the last year, about a year. So I'm on immunosuppressant drugs for the rest of my life. And so I'm actually in the category that would be challenged to be in this kind of environment. But I'm very confident that our plan is sufficient, that I won't be at risk. But that depends on the folks who are coming into the building also making sure that they're being careful at home. So please do that. If we do have an outbreak, not only could it shut down the school, but those people who are in the building who are immunosuppressed or immunocompromised would have additional challenges as well. Practice the hand washing and mask wearing at home. So even if you're, obviously masks are not required at home, but if you have a child who's having challenges wearing it, practice wearing it at home. Have some fun with it. You could play like a peekaboo game. You could put a mask on one of their dolls or a superhero, something like that. make it a normalized thing. And then if you have, we're talking about the safer habits at home, part of that is making sure that the folks that you're interacting with have that same level of social distancing, again, morality that you do. And so there's an article from Self magazine, and she talks about Jenny. She's been best friends with a roommate for decades. They lived together on and off for years. She says, we've been through it all together and we've always been here for each other. She told Self that the state lifted the stay-at-home restrictions and Jenny is still practicing the vigilant social distancing, so very similar to Wisconsin, but her roommate started going to workout classes. So Jenny feels that's putting them both at too much risk. She said, I would have never expected to be so ideologically split. And so this article gives 8 different ways on how to navigate if you've got loved ones or close friends that aren't practicing the same social distancing that you are. This gives you 8 ideas on how to handle those situations. And that is it. So now we're at our question and answer session. So if you could either do the hand raise piece, or you can type your questions in the chat, and then we can answer those for you.
There were a couple of, this is Marilyn, there was a couple of questions asking what happens when the winter time comes and you got runny nose. The kids got runny nose. Will they be sent home?
Yeah. Dr. Navsaria, would you like to address that? Sorry.
Okay, sure. Happy to. So you're absolutely right. And when you look at that list of symptoms, right, it's deeply annoying because that's like 90% of all diseases that children get. Drives us crazy in the medical world, really. So here's the thing. It's the only thing we have to go on to say there's something going on. So that's just the first step. Because of how much concern there is about spread of this virus throughout our community at large and in the school community, what we would then suggest you do is, if a child has fever, cough, et cetera, any of those things, and particularly if, look, you're going to have to tell us about symptom monitoring as well. If your child got a runny nose because they walked in through the cold air, and it hasn't been a problem, okay.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. If we're really talking about symptoms that have been there for at least a few hours consistently, if not longer. And then the other thing is, just tip from the medical world, call your child's healthcare provider. If your only concern is, I'm just not trying to figure out if my child may have COVID or not, then they might say, you know what, if that's your only concern, then we don't even need to see you, and we might send you through a drive-through testing site, okay? And you don't need to even come into the clinic. Or they might say, what you're describing is more concerning. Why don't you come in? We'll want to listen to their lungs, or look in their throat, or whatever the case may be. And then that way you avoid sitting in a waiting room around other sick people, et cetera, unless it's absolutely necessary. So call ahead and try to get their guidance, because if you say, look, I think everything looks okay here, it's just that they have a runny nose and a fever, they might send you through one of the different sites that are currently open. That is also changing in all the health systems to, just week by week, they're adjusting. But that would be a good way to kind of look at that. What we're trying to do is avoid saying, oh, well, I think this kid's fine, and letting them in, and then next thing we know, the whole classroom and the adults included, et cetera, are all having to be tested because it turned out to be a case of COVID. So you're absolutely right that we do not have more specific symptoms to go on. We are not trying to unnecessarily exclude kids, but we're trying to be cautious about anything that could represent a symptom.
Another question was, my concern is, what if the child has epilepsy, the effects of COVID, and how can we plan to keep kids safe with disorders? Well, let me start with that one, because if there are children who are compromised and who would be deeply affected by that, then those are the students who should do virtual learning. Students shouldn't be participating in that.
Can you repeat the question because of this unstableness sometimes? Can you repeat the question?
Sure. My concern is, what if the child has epilepsy and the effects of COVID would be negative for that child? How do we plan to keep kids safe with disorders?
And I'd like to just add that the other thing is, if you're concerned about your child's chronic health condition, that is a great reason to have a conversation with your child's doctor about it, just to make sure that you are thinking about how much risk they're truly at in the best possible way, right? Because they might say, well, actually, I think this is a low risk and here's why. Or they might say, yeah, this is actually much higher risk, and yes, you should consider virtual learning. Each child is so different, and their own, each condition is so different, that we can't give you a blanket guideline like that.
Another question was, if the school is open and the child needs to stay home, will something virtual be available? Yes, the virtual, if we do in class and at home, the virtual will be available to anyone who would like to. And in fact, if there's a child who is in class in person and needs a refresher, and the family wants to help them after school, those videos will be available. You'll be able to review those again. What will be the class size for each class? We looked at the ratio, so that would be from 9 to 15, and there are a couple different vectors for that. One is classroom, and so some of the different classrooms are different sizes, so that will affect, we want to make sure that we have appropriate social distancing. And then the other piece is what the preferences of parents are and what the stage of potential vulnerability for the child academically and socially would be. What are the locations away from the school that one city plans on using? That's not determined yet. All the locations that we are looking at this point are still in our zip code, and so they will all be within a 15-minute drive up here. We haven't finalized any particular location yet. We're looking at about 3 that we're in negotiation on, but we don't have that finalized yet. We'll let you know.
Mommy. Mommy.
Please mute yourself. Please mute yourself. If you're not talking, please mute yourself.
The cans that are in the cabinet.
Bring one, let me see.
If everyone can mute their phones, mute theirs while we're still talking, please. Please mute yourself.
Is Isabel the only one available to check every single child? And I believe Isabel responded to that. She said, no, I will not be the only one. Administrative staff will be trained also to receive children and check temperatures, but the online forms will make this process faster. Safety was a concern this year and was not properly addressed. How can we be sure that one city is going to stick to these protocols, encouraging kids to keep masks and keep clean? So multi-levels in that one. Obviously, we have a very different administration, first of all, and we also have a lot of new staff that are going to be here in this coming school year. So things will be different. The staff that are still here are very dedicated to making sure that we're safe, making sure that the students are safe. I can tell you that 100% as they've been talking to me over this last 5 weeks. The second part, encouraging kids to keep masks on and keep clean. 2 things to that. One is, as we just talked about, we want you to practice that at home, especially with the masks. If there are children who are having challenges wearing the mask, please practice that at home so that it isn't such a different thing once they get to school. The keeping clean piece, we saw the song that we use for not touching our face. We're going to have another song that we're going to use for washing your hands. And those are things that we'll share with you, and we'd like you also to practice at home. So we really need to make this, this time shouldn't be out of the ordinary. So make the things that are happening at home the same kind of things, the same routines that are happening at school, and that'll make it much easier for everyone.
Let me also just reemphasize that masks, I'd like to think of them almost like being an airbag in a car, right? There's so many things that we hope happen before that airbag is necessary, right? We hope that people are driving safely. We hope that they're licensed drivers. We hope that they're thinking carefully. We hope that the other parts of the car help mitigate the impact. We hope there's anti-lock brakes. We hope there's seat belts. But if all of those levels fail and your head is about to smack into the dashboard, that's when you want the airbag. The mask is there to say, hey, the virus got through all these other layers of things, the social distancing, the protocols, the safety, the symptom checks and all that. Okay, the mask might then make a difference there. So if a child doesn't wear a mask well or consistently, or there's little lapses, it shouldn't matter because it's part of this larger set of layers. Okay, it's that airbag. So I don't want people to think that if the mask was our only strategy, my goodness, then we should just all go to virtual learning. So that's the way to think about this, is that we're not looking for perfection from children here. That's not attainable with young children. It's not even attainable with adults. How many adults do you see walking around with a mask down below their nose? It doesn't work that way, people, right? So we need to be thinking about other broader strategies as well, and that's what's in place.
Great analogy, thank you. The next one is for you also, Dr. Navsaria, and this is related to our discussion earlier today. The question was, for kids who receive special education resources, if the students are spread throughout many venues, how will our special education coordinators connect with each child? So I think that's tied to the question that we were discussing about one person who might need to go into multiple classes. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I sent you email, which you wouldn't have seen yet, on this. I think we need to think about who what the kind of work that people are doing for those few who have to go from classroom to classroom. So if it's someone who's just checking in on different rooms, right? Having them do hand hygiene before they enter a room and after they leave, wearing a mask and trying to avoid touching things, etc. Now, obviously, for educators, they may need to be coming up closer to kids. They may be touching them at points and so on. In that case, I would still recommend good hand hygiene and trying to limit, moving from too many classrooms if possible. There may need to be thinking about reassignment or moving people so that again, consistency. Consistency is the most important thing here. So I think that really you'll have to look at staffing levels and trying to minimize that contact, and also minimize the contact in the room, right? You don't need to high five every kid as you walk into the room, just simply the kid that you are working with and so on. And using other ways to convey camaraderie, connection, love, and regard for one another beyond, touch. And that's not to say that we're not going to touch the kids. Kids do need comfort, they do need touching, but just saying that we're going to try to reduce some of the less necessary elements of that when possible. I believe you're muted right now.
Appreciate that. A couple of questions about packing your own lunches. That's fine. We'll also make sure, and if you could reinforce with your children that we're not sharing any food. So that would be the biggest thing with lunches being packed. Obviously, if you have a really cool lunch and somebody else has a lunch they don't perceive as very cool, they might want to share, and your caring child might want to share with them. Just need to make sure that they know that that's not going to be available. Dr. Navsaria also shared a link for an article about parents with playdates. And Nurse Felker would like to know your opinion on the strategy for monitoring the CDC symptoms list.
The CDC symptom list, I think, is unfortunately right. As I said, it's the best we have, which is not very good. I wish we had. Here's what I wish we had. I wish we had something where we could do a very simple, like, wipe a little swab across next to your nose, put in a machine that was cheap and inexpensive, and that would spit out a result in under 2 minutes. That would be lovely. That magical time is not here yet. Because we need to go with the next best thing, which is really symptomless checking and just being aware.
Question, I heard teachers have left. Are there enough new teachers hired to stamp all the grades? Quick answer on that is yes. Many of them are still going through training right now, but they will definitely be ready for the beginning of the year. Will there still be early release on Mondays? Yes. How far apart will the kids be? Dr. Navsaria, can you give us what your opinion on that is as far as distance between children?
Mm-hmm. So the general rule that we've all heard is 6 feet. Now, nothing magical happens at 6 feet. If you cough or sneeze or sing or breathe heavily or whatever, the droplets that come out of your mouths start to fall towards the ground. When you get to 3 feet, quite a few have fallen. But by 6 feet, virtually all have fallen. That's where the 6 feet number. If somebody gets 5 feet away, does that mean that, oh, they're automatically going to get it? Of course not. But 6 feet is better than 5 feet, which is better than 4 feet, and so on and so forth. Having said that, I think we also need to be thinking about if we're having kids in these classroom cohorts, right, these bubbles, so to speak, where there are going to be, around each other, they're going to be in enclosed spaces come winter, all those sorts of things. It's not as practical to say, okay, everyone is going to be 6 feet apart continuously every single moment, right? So I think we'll have to talk about what kind of spacing is possible in the classrooms, given this classroom size and the class sizes and all of that, but also recognizing that 6 feet may not actually be practical in many settings in those situations. And where we do care about the 6 feet is where people outside of that bubble are coming, like parents at pickup, right? That's actually, I think, a greater concern where 6 feet makes a bigger difference versus children who are seeing each other day in and day out because they're in this single unit that will remain contained within the school setting.
And Michelle, we'll get to you in 1 second. I saw you raise your hand. I'm going to answer some of the other questions, actually one of your questions in the text. If people are gathering in large groups without being safe and the school is aware of that, what happens? Dr. Navsaria, what are your general thoughts on if we see somebody in a video and they're at a large gathering?
That's a good question. And honestly, public health struggles with that as well, because, you know, it's hard when, you know, people are calling in and reporting X, Y, or Z, and no one wants to be confrontational if they can help it. We'd like to appeal to people to really being thoughtful and careful. I think if we're aware of something, so you know what, I'm going to tell you. So I'm medical director of a clinical training program on campus as well. And we have made it abundantly clear to our students that they need to be, you know, good examples, that they are, you know, nascent healthcare practitioners, and they need to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And if we become aware that they are going out to bars and partying and things like that, that is a professionalism concern, and we will, you know, haul them in and talk about it. So likewise, I think, you know, we as a school, if we become aware of that, I think we can consider saying something and saying, you know, like, we really need you to protect our community. What do you do beyond that? That's a hard one. And I think that's something we'll have to discuss.
And just folks need to acknowledge that if we're able to do this in-person teaching for a portion of the students, that's a privilege. We will definitely have virtual learning available, a new version of virtual learning, a new improved version of virtual learning. But the in-person, that's the privilege. So if that sort of bond is broken, then you may lose that privilege. Will staff be screened every morning? Yes, they will. Same as children. Staff is filling the same form as the kids. Yeah, so Isabel said, yeah, staff is filling out the same form. Sounded like there would be some priority given for students, for which students come in person. Does that mean it's possible that a parent who wants to send their child in person might not be able to? That's a possibility. Based on the survey results, if those preferences stayed the same, we would probably be able to accept all the families who wanted to have their children in person. But it is a possibility when the final decisions come in as far as parent preference. It is a possibility that we would have to use a lottery or some other system. Is the school going to be disinfected every day? Yes. We will actually be hiring an outside company to do that. And okay. And so if Michelle, if you wanted to go on camera, you are welcome to do that. Now to ask your other question. Make sure she's unmuted. Marilyn, do you see her? Oh, there we go.
What you need?
Just
trying to unmute Michelle. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, you guys got me unmuted. No, I just wanted to say that as a teacher, within a classroom, 6 feet social distancing will not be able to happen all the time. So I just think that's something that should be made clear.
Yeah, so certainly.
And that's why I made the point that we're unable to that we don't want to put anyone in in situations that are impossible to follow. You know, it's just ridiculous, it's frustrating, and then it also leads to the risk that people then forget all the guidelines, you know, saying that, oh, none of this works, and they even throw away the things that are possible. This is, again, why, much like the masks, that's almost like an airbag, right? That all the other things that we're doing in terms of symptom checks, in terms of keeping classes together and not interacting with each other and so on, all these things will help hopefully reduce the fact that social distancing is just simply not feasible in many cases.
Question, if this is more a school question, if we don't elect in person now, will we be able to opt in at the semester or quarterly? Also wondering if siblings can be kept to the same schedule for pickup and drop off. So on the first question, the survey you did is by no means a binding survey. So that was to help us identify what most people are desiring so that we can identify the potential options. So that's not binding. We will do another survey, certainly when we get closer to the beginning of the year, because things may change at that point. So what you said now is not binding. You can certainly change your decision, and then we'll go from there when late August happens. If siblings can be kept together, we're definitely going to try and make that happen. If we can get the siblings to be within the 10-minute, so if let's say you have a child in kindergarten who is coming in at 7:50, and you have a child who is in first grade who is scheduled to come in at 8, that we could make happen. And so we'll try and make those staggers with that in mind, that there are siblings. So we'll look at those sibling pairings, and that'll be one of our first considerations for when the staggered times are. Will you guys send out the survey again for in person? Yes. So yeah. So the survey will come out again closer to the beginning of the year. I'm sorry, well, beginning of the school year. So probably last week in August, that will come out again just to verify what people's desires are, and based on current knowledge about the virus at that point. All right. I'm going to put, so my email address is in there. Go ahead.
I could make just one more comment. You know, the real question, I think, is always, part of it for us is, will, you know, doing this or doing that reduce risk by some percentage, right? And we don't actually know what those percentages are. But the real big question is, right, will this reduce the risk of spread within our community? Does this work? And just this week, Monday actually, was a major report from South Korea looking at their schools reopening. And I actually just wrote a commentary piece on this this afternoon for something I do some writing for. And what they found was that spread amongst children seemed to be much lower, which is what we've also been seeing in some of the European studies of school reopenings. But this one, notably, much larger population, they found that the spread in kids that were 10 and under was much lower, like remarkably low. It wasn't zero, but it was much lower. Once it got above 10 years of age, then it was much more. So thankfully, we're not running a high school yet, so we don't need to worry about that. But it did help delineate, like, with all these sorts of precautions and so on that they were doing in some other countries, what was the spread really like? And again, it was low. Most children were actually, you know, and again, were coming to very little harm, that the illness was very mild if they did get it. And it helped us feel a little more confident about saying, okay, great, at least in early education, preschool, et cetera, plus in the early grades through elementary school, we have a little more confidence based on that South Korean study. There's going to be more studies coming, of course, down the road, but that really kind of helped change some of how we were able to think about this. By we, I mean just the medical community as a whole, and policy and so forth. So we do at least have that information and that data to help guide us. Where you may have seen headlines about school outbreaks, et cetera, for example, early childhood centers in Texas, big outbreak there. That's because Texas decided to reopen with no guidelines, and no one was asked to prepare or do anything. They just went back to business as usual. That lasted a mere 3 weeks. And then they had to clamp back down. We're not doing that around here.
Thank you. There were a couple of last questions just around scheduling. We'll look at those on a case-by-case basis. So if you, I've listed emails in there. Fdabell@onecity, that's me. So if you have any questions about the operational side of it, the educational side of it, or scheduling, send me an email. If you have questions about the health side, you can send those to Maggie Felker or Isabel Perea, and they'll forward those to Dr. Navsaria, and we'll create a frequently asked questions and answer sheet for you on that. And
just want to say thank you to Principal and to the doctor for being here this evening. Thank you to our families and other participants who took time out to this evening. We went past our schedule, which means that we were definitely engaged. I love it there. As mentioned earlier, if you have an opportunity, please let us know how you're feeling on the link that was provided. This is a recording. This will be provided as well as the chat session to answer any questions that hasn't been answered yet, or a little bit more information. I just want to again say thank you. And this is going to be the start of a new One City. And just on a side note here, please make sure you have all your enrollment information in. The 31st is coming up, and always look at your Remind text group. That's a great way to make sure you find out what's going on real time. Okay, so thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening. We'll be talking to you soon. Bye.
all right, thank you, Marilyn.